headquarters, and I'm excited to welcome you to our negotiation training today called Negotiating for Yourself and Your Organization with Alexandra Dickinson from Ask For It. I'm going to take a few minutes to welcome you and give you a little bit of background information on EPIP, and then we'll let Alex run the training. If you're new to EPIP, welcome, and if you are part of our community, welcome back. Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, EPIP, is a national network of foundation professionals, social entrepreneurs, and other change makers who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. And we do that by providing a platform for our community to connect with others, to learn and practice leadership skills like negotiation, and to inspire emerging ideas in the social sector. If you have any questions, if you'd love to learn more about how we do this in our programs, on our blog, even through all of the different events that EPIP leads, then please reach out. We'd love to talk about membership or answer any questions. My email is biz@epip.org, and I'd be happy to talk to you over email, or we can make a time to talk on the phone. What's next? We're excited to be continuing our Wednesday webinar series in a couple weeks with a webinar about transformational philanthropy through giving circles. So it's going to bring together a couple speakers with years of experience to both talk about what giving circles can make happen, their legacy and history in change making, and give you some tips on how to either work with giving circles or to lead one and be part of one yourself. You can register online at epip.org/events, and you can also see there a whole list of upcoming events. I know that a few chapters have local events happening, so you can find those on our events page. And you can also see upcoming webinars, including one in March on implicit bias in grant making. So we hope we will see you there. In terms of housekeeping for today's call, we are going to use the question box. If you have any technical difficulties, if you can't hear or you're having trouble seeing or anything along those lines, please just go ahead and type it into the question box, and we'll do our best to help you troubleshoot. If you have content questions, or at the end in our Q&A session, if you have questions you'd like to share then, please type them into the question box as well. If you're following us on social media or you want to share feedback from the event there, EPIP Webinar is a hashtag for today's conversation. And we are recording the webinar today. If you can please complete the post-webinar survey, that will allow us to make sure that we continue to create content that's most meaningful for you, and also allow us to incorporate your voice in our scheduling for the future. So now I'd love to introduce Alexandra Dickinson, who is one of the co-founders of Ask For It. She'll go ahead and give you more information, but I'm very grateful on behalf of EPIP and our community for your time and attention customizing this training for our community today, and I'm really excited for the content. So I'm going to pass the presentation over to you, Alex, and thank you for joining us.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Biz, for that introduction. Can you just confirm all good? Everyone can see and hear?
Yes, you're all set to go.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Alex Dickinson, and I'm the co-founder of Ask For It. We are a boutique consulting company working on closing the gender wage gap by taking both an institutional and an individual approach. So we work with companies, we work with institutions like schools and governments, we work with entrepreneurs, and we work with individuals through a combination of trainings, workshops, and consulting. So very excited to be here with EPIP today to talk about negotiating for yourself and your organization. I want to start off by telling you that we take an empirically driven, research-based approach, and it's biased towards action. What that means is I want you to walk out from this webinar with actionable knowledge that you can use to get more success in your everyday life, at work, all of the above. All the statements I'm going to make today are backed by peer-reviewed published research. So if I say things that sound general, there's research behind it. If you have questions about the research, I'd be more than happy to answer. And we try really hard not to problematize any particular population by saying, well, women can't negotiate, or men are sexist, or any of those sorts of things. So negotiation is a skill that you can learn and practice and get better at and achieve more success right away, and that's one of the reasons that I love teaching it. So just with that background info, let's get going. Very nice to meet you. Again, I'm the one in the orange, that's me, and then in the blue is my co-founder, Missy, and like I said, we're a boutique consulting company. We'll move on from here. So this is our agenda for today. So we'll talk about common misperceptions about negotiating and some key concepts. First off, I want to open your mind to what negotiation is, what it isn't, how it might help you in your life. We'll talk about how to prepare effectively. We'll talk about engaging in a negotiation when you're in a room with somebody face-to-face or on the phone. What are you doing? We'll spend a little bit of time talking about gender, race, and culture, just because that's a big part of everything about life these days, and there are some specifics to know depending on who you are, who you're negotiating with. So I'll share some research around those three topics, and of course there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So at points throughout the presentation, I will pause and ask you to take action and to think about a way to put the information that I'm sharing into practice in your own life. As Biz mentioned, sometimes we'll have questions or polls, and she'll jump in and explain how those things work using the GoToWebinar control panel, just for a little audience participation. And so let's actually start out with a question right now. What areas of negotiation do you want to learn about today? Biz?
So we'd love it if everyone took a minute to go to the question box and enter in the answer to Alex's question for you. What are you most interested in learning about negotiation today? And we'll take about a minute to wait for your responses, and then we'll share them with the group. Right, so thank you guys. It looks like people are interested in learning about salary negotiations, job responsibilities, when to walk away, negotiation about promotions, just how do you even begin the conversation, how do you do research, how to get over fear, thinking about negotiating within your team and managing up, and benefits, flexibility, negotiating with nonprofit partners who implement a career readiness and internship program, so thinking about working with partners, and vacation time. It looks like a lot of folks are interested in those topics. Oh, also negotiating with vendors and consultants, and negotiating maternity leave.
Great, all great. All great topics. So we'll cover some of those specifically today. I also want to encourage you to think about how the techniques that we talk about today can apply to lots of different specific situations. So great, and if you have questions at the end, something that we didn't cover, feel free to ask. So with that, let's talk about some perceptions or misperceptions of negotiation. And one more quick question before we jump in. I know you're all excited to get going, but I'm curious, before I talk about perceptions and misperceptions, just very quickly, what are some words that come to your mind when you think of a good negotiator?
So go ahead and type those into the question box again, please. What comes to mind when you think of a good negotiator? I'm saying prepared, confident, strong personality, strong advocacy, tough, charming, good listener, analytic, strategic, insistent, persuasive, adversarial, charismatic, direct, respectful, stubborn, and objective, and understands the other side's needs or considerations.
Great. Awesome. I heard a lot of different things there. Some were on the more positive side, some were a little bit more negative, if you will. So thank you for sharing those. Great kickoff. I'm going to talk about some of the most sort of common ones. Firstly, we think negotiation is rare, right? We think that it only happens if you're getting a new job, or you're getting a house, or you're buying a car, or selling a car. So negotiation happens all the time. we'll talk about negotiation in the context of the workplace and your organization today, but keep in mind, like I said, a lot of these concepts can be applied successfully outside of those areas. So being a confident negotiator can enhance your sense of self-worth. It can expand your freedom to make changes in your life, to encourage you to try new things, strengthen your relationships at home and at work. We think negotiation sometimes is aggressive. We think that winning at negotiation means that you're demanding, you're aggressive, I think one of the words was stubborn. So we see this bull, we think of aggression. Maybe we think some people are just gifted. Some people are just born negotiators. I'm here to tell you that it's not that you're born with it or you're not born with it. This is a skill that you can learn, you can practice, you can get better at. And one of the most successful ways to get better at being a negotiator is to practice. So think about ways that you can take some low-stakes risks and practice going forward from this webinar today. I also want to take a moment to talk about mission-driven work, since we're talking about philanthropy, right? Maybe we think if I work in a nonprofit, I do something that's mission-driven or has an emphasis on values, I work at a foundation, that means that I'm not going to get paid very much and that I just have to accept that. Budgets are reality for sure, but I want to also just expand that a little bit by giving you some reasons to think about why it's okay to negotiate even if you work at a nonprofit or a foundation. Just to kick us off here, just to change that mindset. I've worked with other groups and had a lot of questions about this, and so I want to take a moment to talk about it. So pay satisfaction reduces turnover, which ultimately saves money for the organization, and it's particularly relevant, let's say, if you work with clients, maybe you work with women at a shelter, and you're one of the few people that she's close to, and then at some point you live your life and you have to make a change. You need to make more money for lots of legitimate reasons in life, right? Not just about being greedy, but about having satisfaction, being able to accomplish your goals, or save for retirement or something like that. You might need to leave, and maybe that impacts your clients. So turnover is one reason. Nonprofits also, sometimes need to recruit skilled workers from the private sector, and they have to be competitive. So not that you have to meet private sector salaries necessarily, but that this is a factor sometimes. You might need to bring in somebody with expertise that just doesn't exist within the organization, and that might be one reason that you might negotiate for higher pay if you're coming from the private sector, for example. It's also bigger than just dollars. So thinking in terms of the value that you bring to a mission-based organization. Rather than, we can't do this programming because we gave you a raise, possibly think about how much more programming can we do now that I'm satisfied, I'm energetic, and I'm committed to staying here, and I'm keeping all my energy with me. So I'd like to take a very brief poll. Have you ever felt or been told in some way that you should be content with less because you work at a mission-driven organization?
So I'm going to actually launch the poll. It looks like a few people very enthusiastically shared in the question box. Thank you. If you can go ahead and click on this quick poll, yes, no, or not sure. It looks like we ran out of letter spots here, but organization should be the last word. So please go ahead and put in your answers, and then we're going to pull up the results. All right, I'm going to close it in 10 more seconds if folks could go ahead and finish voting. All right, it looks like we got about 74% of people have, yes, heard that for some reason they should be content with less because you're at a mission-driven organization. About no, 13% both for no and not sure.
Okay, so yeah, 74%, that's pretty high. So again, budgets are reality and definitely respect that. But just to give you some additional thoughts, we can talk about that at the end if you want, if there are questions. So let's talk key concepts. I have a few bullet points for you here. The rest of the presentation will be more visually beautiful and less of things you might need to write down or take notes on. So I want to get these key concepts taken care of quickly. So target, reservation, and aspiration. These are your different levels you're thinking about when you're preparing to negotiate, particularly about money in some way. So target is the amount that you would love to get, you would love to pay. So maybe it's a low number if you're trying to buy a car for a lower number. Maybe it's a higher number if you're trying to get your salary. But your target is your, ideal outcome. Remember that when you're thinking about what your target is, people perceive more expensive things as more valuable. So all that to say, don't set too low of a target, right? Your reservation is, at this point, you're indifferent to either taking the offer or walking away because you're going to be in the same position either way. Your aspiration is, I like to say, just this side of crazy. So your aspiration is what you're going to start if you're making a first offer, we're going to talk about first offers, that high number that you're going to start with, not so high that somebody thinks it's nuts. How do you find out what's too high, what's high enough? We'll talk about that in the preparation section, but just this side of crazy, knowing that the point of a first offer is not to get it accepted right away because you might be leaving value unclaimed or rejected out of hand for being totally crazy. You're just trying to get a counteroffer. And so we'll be talking about first offers going down the road. Your BATNA is a fancy acronym that stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement, and this is basically your leverage. So if you're in your performance review and you're asking for a raise, your BATNA is not very strong because your alternative is the status quo, probably, right? You're going to still stay in your same job. However, if you're getting a new job and you already have a job, then maybe you can compare one to the other. You can get some mileage out of that. So your BATNA, think of that as leverage, your alternative. And then finally, your anchor. Anchors are sort of the first number that gets put out there. So if I say to you 17, what's the number that's in your head? It's a rhetorical question, but probably the number in your head is somewhere orbiting around 17. It's not going to be like 2.3 million, for example. An anchor creates a drag just like a physical anchor in the water does. So the first number anchors the conversation. If it's high, if it's low, everyone kind of is thinking around that number. And even arbitrarily chosen anchors influence value estimates. So research has shown that negotiators who make the first offer do better, primarily because anchoring is really effective psychologically. We're going to talk more about first offers and why you might want to make one, even if you've been told never make the first offer. So we'll get there. A few more key concepts, and then we'll move on. So there are 3 different types of bargaining. You might think like there's just bargaining, right? I want to pay less for this, want to earn more for that. There's actually 3 different types. There's distributive, integrative, and congruent. And they're relevant because there's different strategies depending on what types of issues on the table. So distributive bargaining is the idea of I get more, you get less. This is typically about money. This is the fixed pie mentality. There's only so many pieces to go around, and if I get more of them, you get less. Integrative bargaining is more commonly known as log rolling or horse trading. This is creating more value. This is making the pie bigger. These are things you've probably heard somewhere along the road. This is realizing that you have different priorities than your counterpart. For example, there's a story. It's common in negotiation books, but if you haven't read them, it may not be common to you, so I will share it quickly. 2 sisters are baking a cake, and there's 1 orange left in the house, and they're both making different cakes, and they both want the orange. And so they fight over it, and eventually maybe one of them goes to the store or something. But the moral of the story is it turns out that one sister wanted just the rind of the orange, and the other sister wanted just the juice of the orange. So integrative bargaining is figuring out what the priorities are between you and your counterpart, how they align, overlap, or how they don't align or overlap, and finding ways to create more value. Finally, congruent issues are issues where you and your counterpart want the same thing. Sometimes one of the negotiating partners figures out that you have a congruent issue before the other one, and that's when you can really do some damage, depending on which direction you want to take it. If you figure out that you and your counterpart both want the same thing, for example, you're starting a new job, and at your new job, that you you want to start right away because you have a vacation scheduled later in the year and you don't want it to conflict, and your new boss wants you to also start right away. Well, maybe, you know, you and your boss doesn't realize that you actually want to start right away. They assume that you want more time off. So if you figure out that this is their priority but not yours, you can go one of two ways. The direct strategy is you're generous and you're offering something without asking something in return. So this is useful if you want to establish better rapport or you have a long-term relationship you're concerned about. You just give it away. The trading strategy is, okay, I'll start in 2 weeks, but in exchange for that, I want an extra week of vacation since I'm not going to get one right up front. You want something in exchange for the concession that you've made. So it's a little bit more hardball. You want to get as much value as you can. You're not as concerned about the relationship. So those are all the key concepts. Hopefully they're up there in your brain. We'll refer back to them later, and we'll come back to them as we go along. So let's just take a quick moment to take action. Think about an upcoming negotiation that you might have, something that you're preparing for. What is your BATNA? What's your leverage, your alternative? What is it? Write it down. And what happens if you don't reach an agreement?
So this is just something for folks to write down on a piece of paper or on a note on your computer, whatever's easiest. You don't need to write this into the question box.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to prepare, and I actually do want to do another very quick poll here. What are some ways that you prepare for an upcoming negotiation? Do you research on the internet? Do you talk to your friends, mentors, and colleagues? Do you wing it, or do you do something else?
So please go ahead and just click which of these is the best answer for how you prepare for negotiations or how you'd like to prepare for an upcoming negotiation. I'm going to close the poll in another 10 seconds if folks who haven't voted yet want to go ahead and put in your answers. All right, so it looks like the majority of folks, 55%, are talking to friends, mentors, or colleagues. And then the next most popular is 32% doing research on the internet. And 6% are either winging it or using another method. It looks like one of the other answers is because they use both the top two, research and talk to friends.
Yes, I don't know whether you were able to select both, but thank you for mentioning that. Okay, great. I'm glad to see that majority of people are talking to others. I'll talk briefly about who you should be talking to and what sorts of things to talk about. So great information to kick off this section with. So I'm just going to go through quickly some different strategies here. First one, be proactive. If you're going into your review and your boss doesn't know that you're planning to ask for a raise, you may have already missed your window. So budgeting season and performance review season don't necessarily happen at the same time. So if you don't know when budgets happen at your organization, find out. You don't want to surprise somebody by going in and asking for a raise in a way that seems like out of the blue. So do your research, and like our poll just reflected, a lot of people talk to their friends, mentors, or colleagues. Websites, internet's also can be a good source, Glassdoor, salary.com, that sort of thing, but of course those are anonymous sources typically. So if you're not already talking to friends and colleagues in your industry, consider doing that, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask you to consider one of the strongest taboos in our culture, which is talking about money. Consider, if you're in a position where you're negotiating a new salary at a new job, or you're making a strong case for asking for a raise, consider asking somebody else who works in your industry, maybe not somebody at your company, how much they're making approximately in a ballpark. And you would do it for this reason specifically, because having more information gives you more power. Being able to go into that conversation and say, well, I know that people at this level in this industry are making around X, can be a lot more powerful than just, well, this is the amount that I want. I'm going to give a caveat here, which I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking. Very important to be judicious about who you choose to have a conversation like this with. Probably you wouldn't choose someone at your own company just because, you don't know, things get around and people have different perceptions of these types of conversations. If that's something that you're willing to think about doing, think carefully about a mentor or maybe a former colleague or somebody you are close with that you might be able to have a conversation like this with. And if you're thinking, how would I even say that? Where would I even start? Let me just give you a suggestion, which is take a straightforward approach. You can say something, rather than dancing around, which is more awkward probably, I'm doing research for the market rate for positions like mine because I'm planning to ask for a raise in my upcoming performance review. I'd like to know what's reasonable based on what others are making. Would you share a ballpark salary with me? I think it would help me build a stronger case. You can just go really simple, straightforward like that. By the way, psychologically speaking, most people are inclined to respond to direct questions. So if you ask a direct question, they're more likely to open up and answer to you. Be willing to answer the same question back. They might say, oh, well, how much are you making? And try not to make it about curiosity. Only do this if it's something that you think will actually benefit you. But just, I'm going to put that out there as a taboo busting strategy that might actually be really effective for you. So get comfortable. What do I mean by this? Think about the home team advantage. Think about what is going to set you up for your best success. So I'm talking kind of small specific things here, but they can make a big difference. So where is your negotiation going to take place? Are you going to do it in your boss office where he or she is behind a desk and you're sitting in front of the desk? Maybe you can go to a conference room, or maybe if you work at someplace a little less formal, you can go to a coffee shop. What time of day is your negotiation going to take place? So it's important to know what your own habits are as well as those of your negotiating partner. So maybe your boss is usually in a good mood first thing in the morning. That would be a good time to schedule your meeting. Let's say your meeting is already scheduled right before lunch and you're worried about being hangry. I mean, bring a snack that day. Just try to think through all of those little things that might add up to a change or impact in your mood, or knowing the habits of your counterpart, a change or impact in their mood. This also includes thinking a little about your appearance and what makes you feel most confident. So if that means wearing a particular outfit or taking particular care to do your hair in a certain way that day, or wearing certain shoes or whatever, your lucky cufflinks, take the time to do that so that you go in feeling your best. And that's not about vanity, that's just about psychologically when you feel confident, when you're well put together. Next is role play. So this picture, I think she looks like she's role playing, doesn't she? It can feel kind of silly, maybe especially as adults. We think, well, I'm not a kid, I don't need to do this. It makes a difference, it really does. Getting those words out, I'm not talking about to your hairbrush in the mirror or even just inside your own head. I mean actually speaking words out loud to another human being. So find, again, somebody that you trust, probably not a colleague, maybe a former colleague, a mentor, even maybe a sibling or a parent or a partner, somebody that you're really close to that you trust, and give that person the ammunition to come back at you with the challenges that you anticipate facing. If you're really afraid that your boss is going to say, well, I don't think you deserve that much money, frankly, hopefully, first of all, your fears are bigger than the reality. But if that's your biggest fear and you're worried that that's going to happen, share that with the person that you're role playing with so that you can practice coming up with a response to it. That's, like I said at the beginning, practicing is the most effective way to become a better negotiator. So give yourself the opportunity to practice. Make yourself accountable. You've heard it for weight loss. It's also true for negotiating. Holding yourself accountable is a really effective strategy. So you can do this in a few ways. Write down your number somewhere that you're going to see it. And actually, I would say write down your 3 numbers, your reservation, your target, and your aspiration. And then if you're feeling really bold, tell somebody that you trust what your numbers are so that they can hold you accountable. If you tell your mom, hey, mom, I'm going and asking for a raise and I'm asking for this much, are you going to feel like you're disappointing your mom if you come back and you're like, well, I chickened out and I didn't do it? And the last thing is give yourself an incentive. Studies show that incentives are really effective. So if you say to yourself, okay, if I get the raise that I'm looking for, I'm going to take myself out to dinner, or I'm going to buy that new something or other I've been wanting. and really make sure you follow through and do it. The incentives are really effective. So let's take a brief moment to take action. Again, just for you, this is not in the control panel, but what conversations can you initiate now to prepare your counterpart for an upcoming negotiation? And while you're thinking about that, I'll just mention that I use the word counterpart really specifically. I'm not saying, sometimes I've been saying boss, but I don't say opponent, which is something that you might hear elsewhere, which has a much more combative sort of tone. I look at negotiation as creative problem solving and going in with that mindset of we're solving a problem together. Therefore, this is my counterpart as opposed to my opponent. It's not about winning and losing. It's about creating more value, and also for you, it's about claiming more of that value. So take a moment to think about what conversations you could have now. Okay, so with that said, we're going to move on to considering our counterpart. So what does your counterpart want? And in this case, I'm referring, I suppose, to a boss, but again, there are lots of different situations that you can use these techniques in. If you live with somebody who is taking out the trash at home, and maybe it's whose family are you spending Thanksgiving with this year, there's lots of different scenarios. So this is something that we often don't do. We mostly think, oh, how am I going to figure out what magic word to say to get what I want? Well, that's cool, but you also need to figure out what the other person get. That's the way that you're more likely to create value, and then later you want to claim more, of course, but taking the time to really openly, honestly think about what it is that your counterpart wants, not just, oh, I don't like this person and I'm against them and whatever, but challenging yourself to do that. Then you're going to identify the 3 types of issues that are at stake in your upcoming negotiation. Remember, we talked about them at the beginning with the key concepts: distributive, integrative, and congruent. So remember, distributive is I get more, you get less. Integrative is log rolling, horse trading, value creating, make the pie bigger. Congruent is we both want the same thing. So when you're doing your strategizing and you're planning for your upcoming negotiation, you're going to think about which issues fall into which category. It'll help you come up with a more effective strategy later. And if you think to yourself, well, the only issue I can think of is distributive, I want a raise and my boss probably doesn't want to give me one, then I challenge you to think bigger. In fact, think about how to make the pie bigger. Doesn't that look delicious? So reminders. Integrative bargaining also comes with, we've talked about fixed pie. I'm going to tell you about the myth of the fixed pie. So this is just that very common mindset that most of us have, which is, well, there's 8 pieces in the pie, and if I want 7 of the pieces, somebody else only gets 1. How can you add more pieces, maybe have different flavors into your pie? I'm going to stop taking that analogy too far before we get silly. But the way that you're able to do that is define what is on the table and then think creatively about what else you can put in. So this is really especially important, again, for if you work at nonprofit, foundation, mission, values-based organization where there may not be more money available. It's not always about money, right? This is where you can create packages and think about creative ways to advance some of your other objectives. Maybe you want opportunities to represent your organization externally. You want to increase your visibility, you want to meet more people in your industry. Maybe you're looking for professional development opportunities, like moving into a supervisory role or a leadership role. Thinking bigger about some of your career objectives, not just, okay, well, I'm hoping to make X amount of dollars by the time I'm, X years. I want to be making 6 figures by the time I'm 40 or whatever it is. Long-term career planning, career strategizing, arguably is actually more effective for wealth building than every single dollars and cents negotiation. Maybe you're thinking about what else you can get out of your current role. Squeeze every last drop of development out of your current role before you go make your next career move, so that the next job that you go to actually has more responsibility or a bigger title, or what your priorities are. Maybe you're looking to move to a different field. So what are the next 1, 2, 3 steps that you want to make in your career, and find ways to add items like that into your discussion. So thinking beyond just dollars. So let's take action briefly. Brainstorm some more issues that you can bring into your upcoming negotiation to make the pie bigger and allow for package deals. And just take seconds to think about that for your own issue that you're preparing for. Okay, great. So we're going to move on to our next section, which is designing a first offer. I alluded to this at the beginning. Now we're coming around to it. And I want to take another very quick poll. Thank you all for being so quick about participating and getting involved in them as well. So I want to know, do you prefer to make or receive the first offer in a negotiation? Either you like to make it or you like to receive it.
So this is Biz. If you could please just go ahead and choose from the poll which of these matches your interest. This is great. I'm going to keep the poll open for another 20 seconds. Folks can continue to vote. All right, about 10 more seconds. If the last few voters could come in, please. Looks like we have a booming majority of people on the line who like to receive the first offer in a negotiation. 82% would like to receive it, and 18% like to make the first offer.
Okay, thank you very much for your votes. I hope that the 18% of you who, or excuse me, I hope that the 82% of you who like to receive the first offer are going to reconsider after this next section. Let's talk about the conventional wisdom, which my guess is you've all heard it. 82% of you have heard it, which may be why you like to receive the first offer. I think what's most commonly out there is the first person who gives a number loses. This is what I was told from a very young age, and the school of thought usually goes like this. If you give a number too high, they're going to think you're crazy, and it might jeopardize your offer. If you give a number too low, you just left money on the table. And if you hit exactly on the head, right what they were planning to offer you, then you may also have left money on the table. So is this accurate? Well, 80%, this matches our poll very closely. 80% of people prefer to receive the first offer. And 82% of us here today said they prefer to receive the first offer. So let's break this down. Reminder, we talked about anchors as one of our key concepts at the beginning. Anchors create a drag, just like a physical anchor on a boat in the water. You put the anchor down and it creates a drag and it slows that ship down and makes it stop. So the first offer creates an anchor. And if they make the first offer, you lose that opportunity to set the bar really high. Most of maybe it's relevant for this population depending on what you do. I don't know. I'm going to ask you about that later, actually. But if you're negotiating with like a big company, say, a lot of places have room to negotiate built in, and they offer you something sort of on the low end, and you assume that that's the high end, just because that's kind of human nature. So making the first offer really work to your advantage. Remember what we said at the beginning, the goal of the first offer is not to get it accepted, but to get a counteroffer. So you want your offer, again, to be just this side of crazy. And how do you figure out what crazy is? That's coming from your research, which we've been talking about. Most effective way to get what crazy is asking those friends, mentors, colleagues, doing research online to the extent that you can find credible sources, and just being as thorough as possible so that you are coming in strong, you're coming in making your case. You're not just saying, well, I want this much and give it to me. Of course, you're going to back it up. We're going to talk about that down the road. But having that research to go in and say, this is, by the way, it happens a lot where if you're getting a job offer and they say, well, how much is it that you are looking to make? You might feel like, oh, I don't want to say, I don't know, because you're afraid of sounding crazy or whatnot. So that's when you got to do your preparation, your homework ahead of time before that conversation ever happens. One counter that people often give is, what's the range for the position? Which is fine, but good luck getting someone to actually tell you the authentic, real range for the position. So while you're thinking about how to design your first offer, since hopefully you're going to consider it, let's talk about precise numbers versus round numbers. I'm using a very round number here as my example, 100,000. So research shows that the more apparently precise offer is, influential it will be. So if you go on like Street Easy or real estate sites like that, you look at the asking price for homes. They're not usually round numbers, are they? They're not usually $100,000. Usually you'll see some sort of, it's 1.2, whatever. So if you're making an offer, you're making a first offer, don't go in with a round number. Go in with something that's more precise. It doesn't actually need to be more precise. It just needs to look more precise. 104,200. Again, your goal is not to get your offer accepted, it's to get a counter offer so that you go back and forth, you understand each other's priorities, you create more value. It is a process. It does take some work and some research, but how much are you willing to give up for the shortcut of not doing the preparation and not doing the research? Your career, add up all those thousands of dollars that you give up, it's worth it, put the effort in. And by the way, rounding up a little is not that hard. By the way, I rounded it up. And one last thing about precise numbers, you don't want to be so precise that people think you're a weirdo. So you wouldn't do like 104,253.72 cents. That's like too precise, okay? So you want to go with not totally round, but not down to the last penny either. So let's take a moment to take action. The first offer creates an anchor, like we talked about, that influences the other party. So what first offer might you make? Just think about that for a moment before we move on. Okay, so engaging in a negotiation. This is, you're in the room, you're actually doing it. What are some ways that you can prepare? What are some things that you need to know before you go in and you're actually in that room? Let's talk about power poses. Power poses, you may have heard of them. They've become pretty famous. There's an Amy Cuddy TED Talk that's very famous called Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are. You also, if you're here in New York like me, you could think about man spreading on the subway, right? Maybe you've heard that term. Taking up space with your body. You can think of Wonder Woman pose. Wonder Woman is like standing, 2 feet flat on the floor, hands on hips, taking up space. You plant your feet on the floor. You don't slouch. You uncross your hands. I want to tell you that the science behind power poses has actually been discredited. So the science that you may have heard is that power posing can affect your levels of testosterone by raising them and affect your levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, by lowering them in as little as 2 minutes, which is what the TED Talk says. And if it sounds too good to be true, unfortunately it is. You can Google it if you want to know more, but I will tell you why I've included this anyway, is because even though power posing can't change your body chemistry in as little as 2 minutes, it is proven scientifically to make you feel more powerful, and that might have still some positive effects for you. So like, what the heck, do it anyway. Go in the restroom for 1 minute beforehand and do it. And when you're in the room, really, particularly for women, but for men sometimes too, don't cross your legs, don't cross your ankles, put both your feet flat on the floor. It does have subtle effects on how your body's feeling, and literally if you could be tipped over easily, if you're sitting sort of all tied up and not planted firmly, it has some psychological effects. So emotions are contagious when you're in a negotiation, so your mood might influence the feelings of your counterpart. So if you go in upbeat, relaxed, and confident versus anxious, nervous, fearful, that can have an impact. If you go in feeling really anxious and it's all over your face, they're going to think, oh, well, this person's not prepared, this person is nervous, they don't know what they're doing, or they're scared. Don't give that away if you can help it. Really try to put a lid on those feelings that you might be having. Good way to do that is to go in with a lot of research and preparation, of course, but also to take those few breaths, do that power pose, try to calm yourself. You've set yourself up for success, hopefully, because you're negotiating in a comfortable environment. Your habits, all of those things contribute to the emotional state that you walk into the room with. So remember that emotions limit your ability to think and act strategically because you're in chaos mode, and they might also create emotional responses from your counterpart that might be counterproductive. This is my favorite piece of negotiation advice that I've ever been given. I heard this very early in my career working in a big corporation. We were about to fire a vendor. We were in the boardroom, which was one of those like TV boardrooms that are, you know, big long table, and we were going to fire this vendor, and we were bringing another vendor to take over, and both the vendors were in the room, and I got to be a fly on the wall. And the chief negotiator of the whole deal, we were asking for money back from that first company. And he told me, we had a lunch break and we were waiting in line in the cafeteria, and he said, Alex, speech is silver, silence is golden. And what that means is, you know, if you say something that's kind of big, you're asking for a big number, or you're about to fire a vendor and you want them to give you money back and you're waiting, I mean, that silence is pressure, right? We want to fill silence. That's human nature. That's how we're conditioned. You want to fill that silence up so it's not awkward. My counsel to you is, if you know that silence might happen, like they say, well, how much are you looking to make at this new job? And you say, well, HR manager, I'm looking for $104,200. Then zip it. And you know that silence might come. You're prepared for it. It might feel a little uncomfortable for you. Depending on how well prepared that person is, they might just be pressured into responding quickly and saying, okay, sounds great, you know? These little psychological tricks can work to your advantage. So prepare for it, know that it might be a little uncomfortable, but that probably they're going to want to fill it, and you may not have to do that work. So also think about who else benefits. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about like how to accomplish your goals, how to get what you want, which is great, very important, of course, but particularly, again, for the nonprofit philanthropical sort of set, and for anyone, really, we don't feel good when we're too selfish, right? It doesn't, you want to think about who else is out there, what else is happening. It's not just about, oh, well, I really want to buy this new pair of shoes or whatever. Just thinking about who else benefits from your success can actually have subtle changes in your demeanor, in your word choice, in the way people perceive you. So your happiness and satisfaction does impact others, and that might be your family. It might also be your team. It might also be your clients. You can think of it as potentially, depending on who you are, what population is meaningful to you. Maybe think, you know what, I'm negotiating on behalf of all women because women are underpaid, and if I get a raise, I am closing that gender wage gap. I'm making my contribution to closing that. And maybe you think, I'm negotiating on behalf of people of color because the wage gap for people of color is even bigger, and I'm doing my bit to close that up. So maybe it's my business partner, Missy, likes to share a story that her family goes on vacation to Florida every year, and you know, last year she really wanted to join them, and it was looking like could go either way, and she thought, well, if I have success in my upcoming negotiation, I will be able to join my family on vacation this year. And she has 3 sisters, and that's a time that they look forward to spending together, and she was successful, was able to do that. And so maybe it's an example like that. But think about that ahead of time so that you sort of know who's got your back, who's in your corner, who you're fighting on behalf of before you go into that conversation, because that can help you as well. So let's take action briefly. Write down the names of others who will benefit if you get more value through an upcoming negotiation, and how will they benefit? Okay, so we're coming down the wire here. I'm going to talk briefly about gender, race, and culture, just sharing a few things, and then we'll have time for questions and close it up. So this is a particular area of interest for me, and I could go on and on forever, but I'll try to be brief. First thing I'm going to tell you about is the I-we strategy, which is called relational accounting, and basically you've heard think locally, act globally. This is think personally, act communally. So actually, if you don't mind taking a second while we're talking about gender, if you wouldn't mind sharing your gender with us. So Biz is going to orchestrate the poll for us.
Hey folks, if you can just let me know by taking a quick second on the poll how you identify with your gender. We'd love to see how the group splits down the different lines. I'm going to leave it open for 5 more seconds. All right, going to close it. Looks like we got a lot of ladies in the house. 96% female and 4% male today on the call.
Great. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. just so you know, I like talking about gender, and I really strongly believe that you can't have change for women without including men. So welcome to the 4% of men that I think that you are crucial. So let me talk briefly about the IWE strategy. Show, explain, ask, and sell. Basically, we have these ideas, these cognitive shortcuts about women. Women are warm, women are kind, women are nice. Negotiators, as we talked about at the beginning, are sometimes aggressive, they get the deal closed, maybe their turn or their so these cognitive shortcuts don't go with each other. So when women negotiate, even if a woman is not being aggressive, still somehow it gets confused up there. I'm being a little flip, but there's plenty of studies to back me up. So the IWE strategy is a way for you to basically work with things as they are. This is a very pragmatic approach. It's very actionable. That's why I like sharing it. I share it telling you that if you do this, you do it, you get success, you get into that leadership spot, then you turn around and you make other women not have to go through this, okay? So put yourself in the organization's perspective, show you care about organizational relationships. Women are supposed to care about this stuff. You probably do anyway, probably men do too, but you need to actually show it. You need to explain why your requests are legitimate, and legitimate in this case means appropriate and justified in the eyes of the employer. So you can't just walk in and say, well, I want this much. You have to say, I want this much, and here's why. Here's all the great stuff I've done. Whereas for men, generally speaking, this strategy, whether men do this strategy or not, has no effect on their success, and women who use this strategy are much more successful. So ask questions to understand your counterpart's priorities. Listen empathetically to reinforce that you're very caring, but also you're listening carefully because you want to use what you learn about their priorities to your advantage when it comes to that integrative bargaining, making that pie bigger. Sell your ability to be an effective negotiator as a skill that you can contribute to your role. Maybe you manage vendors. Maybe you negotiate for resources for your team as opposed to somebody else's team. You know, negotiation happens. It's a leadership skill, so sell that ability. Okay, talk numbers with both men and women. I've sort of alluded to this, but I'll just say now, for the record, to be aware of unconscious gender bias in your research. So when women ask women how much they make, men ask men how much they make, guess what? Men make more. So when you only ask women, then you're getting lower numbers. By the way, men may have access to different networks than women, like on the golf course or whatever, and that's a factor. So being aware of it and trying to counter it best as you can is kind of the best thing you can do about that. Also, I know my company is called Ask For It, but I want to encourage you not to actually literally ask. So use statements rather than questions. Assume that everything is negotiable. So don't say, is this negotiable? Because obviously you're leaving yourself open to somebody saying, well, no, it's not. You know, just if it's truly not negotiable, don't worry, they're going to let you know. So let me give you an example. Rather than saying, I'm wondering whether there's any room for a raise this year, try, I would like a raise this year. That's the specific phrase, I would like. It's a little softer than I want, but it's direct. And it's not so direct that it's going to, you know, change people's perception of you, but it's a little bit more straightforward. Finally, highlight your concessions. If you're working late nights, working weekends a lot, gender stereotypes can inhibit women from self-advocating successfully. Women get less credit because they're expected to concede. So highlight concessions when you make them to ensure that you get something in return. For example, if you worked late every night and on the weekends for the last month to get this project done, maybe you go to your boss and say, listen, I've been working late all this time. I would like 2 extra vacation days in exchange. And you'd be surprised how easy that is for someone to just give you. Okay, let's talk about race. And oops, I think we have a brief poll here. Do we have a poll of this?
We don't have a poll, but if folks want to, we have an age poll.
Oh, okay. Well, I know we're running out of time. I'll close up here. So let me say that similarity induces trust and vice versa. The opposite, unfortunately, is also true. Difference can initially induce mistrust. So people tend to negotiate more cooperatively with people that are the same race as them than people that are different. So if you're going to negotiate with somebody who's a different race from you, you can prepare, first of all, just by knowing that that can induce difference. You want to really go out of your way to establish trusting cooperative relationships before the serious and substantive discussions begin. So putting in some time and effort towards rapport with your counterpart can significantly enhance the likelihood of mutually beneficial transactions. Your counterparts may consciously or unconsciously harbor, stereotypes and cognitive shortcuts about somebody's ethnicity. So if you anticipate that your interaction is going to be difficult, it tends to be self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas if you expect somebody to be cooperative based on their race, it may cause the other person to lower their guard or give up an advantage. So just to be aware that this, it's challenging, and being aware is one of the biggest first things you can do to have more success. Also, create a positive atmosphere, both physically and psychologically. So warm handshakes, open postures. Instead of sitting on opposite sides of the table, maybe sit at the corners, or maybe sit, directly next to each other. Cooperative negotiators, again, tend to have their emotions be contagious. So if you have a very cooperative demeanor, your creative problem solving is the name of the game for you, then it tends to influence that other person, just like we talked about earlier. So being aware of what stereotypes may exist and what stereotypes you may be unconsciously bringing with you. Not to problematize, just to say that this can be reality. Okay, let's talk about culture. So if you're negotiating with somebody possibly from a different country than you, somebody who grew up in a different culture than you, just to be clear. Perception tends to shape reality. So if you're negotiating with somebody from a different country, it can be more ambiguous for in a lot of ways, right? So people can be motivated to reduce the uncertainty and ambiguity by just considering sort of the image of what typically people may be like from that country. And it's not even about how accurate your beliefs are, it's just how quickly and easily those perceptions, whether they're true or not, come into our mind. So our impression of the other side, regardless of whether it's true, is what shapes negotiating strategies. For example, a study I read recently conducted by Harvard was talking about Americans who perceive Chinese people, negotiators from China, to be less ethical than Americans, and the Chinese expected the Americans to be more ethical, and your expectation kind of winds up shaping what happens. Excuse me, not to say that the things are true of everybody, obviously, but that we have these stereotypes, and so if you're going to express disagreement, do it mindfully. So the difference between I disagree, I completely disagree, and I'm not sure I understand can make or break a negotiation. So in some contexts, no might mean something needs further discussion, depending on who you're talking to. So sticking to open-ended questions leaves you with more room to figure things out together. And then think about, there's two types of trust you may or may not know, and it's important to take time to learn how the other culture builds trust. So cognitive trust is based on how much you believe someone's accomplishments, their skills. Affective trust is coming from a sense of emotional closeness. So which one is more valuable to the culture that you're working with, and how will you cultivate that? Okay, we have made it to the end.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask folks to start typing in your questions. This is obviously really, really rich content, Alex, so thank you very much for giving us all this to work with, both in terms of big negotiations, but also day-to-day negotiations in the work that we do and the lives that we lead. I do want to point out we are coming up on the hour, so if you have to hop off, we'll be providing contact info for you to follow up with questions. You can definitely email me, biz@epip.org, for questions if you have to go. But we are going to stay on the line for a few more minutes for people who can to ask and answer some questions. And before we move to the questions, thank you to Teresa for sharing a great resource, just to remind folks who work in foundations that you should be able to access salary information through the Council on Foundations annual salary survey. The numbers are provided by position, geographic race, gender, geographic region, race, gender, etc. So hopefully that can be a resource for preparation for folks. The questions, we've got a few that have come in, and I'd love to start off with one that refers to when people were hired and where they are now. So the question is, if you were hired during a recession and kind of forced to be underpaid based on the nature of the market and the organization's finances at that time. How do you suggest, Alex, that people can initiate a process to negotiate to a rate that's closer to today's market value?
That's a great question, and I will share a story with you that I moved into my apartment in 2008, which was the recession, and then had a lease, and then my lease expired, and I thought, well, I'm paying more than, you know, recession brought everything down. I want to pay less. And so when my lease ended, I renegotiated my lease to get $100 taken off because the market rate had changed, and I brought some data with me to show that, and I was able to get my rent reduced. So I think that that's a pretty valid concern. And so just about getting that data to show what positions like yours are making now. And maybe, you know, one particularly, since we have a lot of ladies on the call, I will say that getting a competing offer can be one strategy to, you know, get you that big bump up. You have to be pretty delicate about it because, unfortunately, that's not that effective for women. It's not as effective for women as it is for men to say, hey, I have this other offer, so meet it, or I'm going to go. What happens is maybe they'll meet it, but then maybe people don't want to work with you because they think you're difficult, which is extremely unfortunate and different for men. But that being said, if you approach it from a creative problem-solving standpoint, and you might get a competing offer that's at a higher price and say, listen, I was approached by this other company, and I have this other offer, and it's a pretty good offer. There, you know, I have a lot of there's different opportunities that I'm looking for, this and that. But I really love my work here for Y and Z reason. Is there a way that you could help me find a way to stay here? You know, approaching it from a, like, help me help you kind of status might work. But getting as much data as you can, having authentic conversations with people who work in your industry, who've changed jobs more recently than you, and then also building a case to, again, you do need to do that work of explaining why your request is legitimate. So you brought in this many new clients, or you've closed this many deals, or you've created this much value. So if you go in with a strong case and then data from what the going rate is, that's your best plan of attack.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pause quickly to let folks know who are still on the line. There's a handout on your control panel. If you'd like to get a chance to speak with Alex or work with her as a coach or as a consultant, please take that postcard handout and save it for yourself. There's a special code that will be applied for anyone who is live on the webinar, and you are welcome to use that postcard in that process. Next question is just generally resources, books, websites for folks. Maybe we can make a list for everyone and send it out. Is that the best way, Alex?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I usually include that, and I forgot this time. Yes, I would be happy to share resources with you. I will tell you, just off the top of my head, my very favorite negotiation researcher is Margaret Neal, N-A-L-E. She comes from the Stanford School, and she did a great video for Lean In, and she wrote a book called Getting More of What You Want, which I love. So she's great. I really like her, particularly as a female negotiation researcher. There's plenty of great guys out there too, of course, but she does lend a different perspective, and she's my favorite one by far. So I'd be happy to share a list of resources, though.
Great, thanks. And then I know we only have a few more minutes, but one question is for people who are entry level and or people who are being told there's no room in the budget. Do you have tips for those specific scenarios?
Yeah, so the best thing you can do entry level is negotiate something just to get that experience under your belt. Know that you accomplished it in some way, right? And that's maybe that separate situation from there's no room in the budget, because that sounds like maybe you want to get a raise, or maybe you're just earlier in your career. There's no room in the budget. You know, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, depending on how hard you want to go to bat on that one. But that is thinking again about how to make the pie bigger, and I would encourage you to approach that from, again, that career planning standpoint. So maybe what do you want your next job to be? Where do you want to be in 5 years? If you're saying, okay, in 5 years I want to be in this type of leadership position and I'm looking for these type of responsibilities, maybe there's no room in the budget, but maybe you want to get experience with being somebody's manager. So ask if you can take on an intern, for example, if you're entry level. Say you get that experience right away. And then the other thing is you can say, okay, I understand if there's no room in the budget right now, when does budgeting season happen? When are you next going to reevaluate that? So can we agree to have this conversation again in 6 months or again whenever budgeting season is? And what objectives would you like me to have accomplished by then so that I'll be in a good position to ask for something additional? So setting that, being prepared for, yeah, maybe the answer is no, but think of it as no for now. Don't think of it as no forever. Or no, I'm embarrassed, I'm never going to ask again. You know, set yourself up for the next opportunity that you can ask and what you can be doing in the meanwhile.
Great. A lot of folks are interested if this recording and slides are going to be available for them online. Yes. On the EPIP.org programs page, there's a Wednesday webinars page on there, and I'll have an archive of all of our past webinars. And by the end of the week, you'll also be able to find Alex's slides and recording up there. We'll be sure to include some resources, so you'll definitely be able to go back to this deck. I want to package together the 3 remaining questions, and then we'll close out within the last 3 minutes of the call. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and thank you again, Alex, for all of the information and energy you brought. The questions are all about specific scenarios, but hopefully you can help us all understand more through them. The first is for people who work at organizations where only the CEO knows how much everyone makes, and they feel like there's not a lot of places to turn to understand how to set a specific dollar amount that is a good anchor and a good start of the conversation. The second is for folks who are managing a team, and it's a sales team that all of the people underneath this person are making almost the same amount as this person. What's a good way to start a conversation with higher-ups about moving forward? And the last question is, what do you think about promotion without a raise?
Promotion without a raise, you're getting gypped. That's what I think about that. That sounds like more responsibility without more pay, and I would encourage you to push back on that or think about how that's helping you meet your goals or not meet your goals, and why, you know, I would think carefully before accepting a promotion without a raise, because that is usually a sign that there's some other things going on, and that's, you know, it's just not in your benefit to take on more responsibility without some other type of compensation. So maybe they don't offer you a raise, but there's something else that you get offered or something else that you can ask for that you want, but that's definitely a conversation that I think would be important to have. So as far as, let's see, the second question was about everyone underneath you is making the same amount as you. Also, you know, that's definitely a conversation starter right there. So you've got your ammo, or not ammo exactly, but you've got your information, and then that's a situation where your research is done for you. I mean, is there a reason why that is? Maybe you have less experience or something, but I think you can make a compelling case about why you should get a raise or why you should get paid more. I guess I would have some questions about how that circumstance kind of evolved and how it got to that point, but it almost doesn't matter because you should be able to go in and have a conversation at the appropriate moment where you say, listen, I'm managing all these people, I'm doing extra work to do the management of these people, and I've brought this much value to the organization, and so therefore I would like, that's the keywords, I would like a raise of X amount. That one, yeah, you just go and prepare, anticipate every sort of pushback that you could think you might get, prepare for it, practice, and then go in and do it. But that one, you know, that seems like that you could make a compelling case for that.
Great, thank you. If you feel like your questions haven't been answered, again, happy to follow up, biz@epip.org. I'd love to echo the comments that we've gotten already from people that this was a phenomenal webinar, and we're really grateful if you want to go back to the content again, it'll be on epip.org by the end of the week, and we'd love to answer any questions as they come up there. So thank you so much, Alex, and thank you to all of our listeners today. We'll see you here again.
Yes, thank you.
Have a great day, guys.